Good evening. Welcome to Shepherdstown. My name is Michael Gann, and I will serve as the moderator of tonight's program. If you could please do us a favor and silence your cell phones or other devices, we would appreciate it. And most importantly, thank you for being here with us tonight, both in person and on the live stream, to celebrate the 250th anniversary of the Postal Service. And even though I have been privileged to serve as General Counsel to the National Rural Letter Carriers Association for over 30 years, I am not biased. I am a supporter of the Postal Service, but I am also a true cheerleader for rural letter carriers, for rural delivery, and for the NRLCA, which is co-sponsoring tonight's event, as well as tomorrow morning's program at the Byrd Center at Shepherd University. And it's no coincidence that we are holding these events here in Jefferson County, West Virginia, because this is where rural delivery began in 1896. And no celebration of the Postal Service would be complete without recognizing the incredibly important contributions of rural free delivery to our nation, culturally, politically, and economically. The Postal Service is stronger because of rural delivery, and our country has prospered because of rural delivery. And tonight, our speakers will illuminate these points from a variety of perspectives. We will begin our program with a welcome and introductory remarks from Don Maston, President of the NRLCA. President Maston, with roots in Delaware and California, has had a distinguished postal career spanning more than 3 decades. In that time, he has served the union in just about every role possible, and most recently as national president, he led the union through a successful contract negotiations during a time of, and this is an understatement, significant transition. We will then hear from our 3 distinguished speakers, and tonight's lineup is quite impressive. First, we will hear from Dr. Alison Bazylinski, who is a curator of the National Postal Museum in Washington, D.C. Dr. Bazylinski has a PhD in American Studies from William & Mary, a master's in history from UNLV, and a BA in history from Northeastern. Dr. Bazylinski will discuss the origins of rural delivery and how it transformed the lives of rural Americans. Dr. Bazylinski will be followed by Dr. Sarah Johnson, a public historian with a PhD from the University of Brighton in England, a master's from NYU, and an undergraduate degree from the University of Northern Iowa. I assume that's where you have your rural street cred. Dr. Johnson has taught at multiple universities, including Carnegie Mellon, the University of Hertfordshire in the UK, and the Parsons School of Design. She has also worked with a number of different museums and local historical societies, and Dr. Johnson's work in public history will help us understand how everyday tools and uniforms reflect bigger cultural shifts. And finally, you'll hear from Emily Hilliard, who currently serves as Berea College folklorist in Berea, Kentucky. Emily is also a writer and media producer with degrees from the University of Michigan, go blue, the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. And for 6 years, Emily worked here with the West Virginia Humanities Council as state folklorist and was founding director of the West Virginia Folklife program. She has also worked for Smithsonian Folkways Recordings and the National Council for the Traditional Arts. We owe Emily a particular debt of gratitude since she will be joining us again tomorrow morning to moderate our program at the Byrd Center. Part of the inspiration for these 2 events was Emily's piece in Jacobin magazine entitled USPS Privatization Would Cost Rural America More Than Mail. When discussing the Postal Service's universal service obligation in that piece, Emily wrote, and I quote, "Without that mandate, private mail service would become unaffordable for many rural residents who live in remote areas and experience higher rates of poverty than their urban counterparts. But privatization could also mean that all the other benefits of rural delivery would be lost for both communities and the people who deliver those routes. These additional services are not necessarily compensated by the Postal Service. They are externalities not factored into the, quote, profitability, end quote, of a federal institution that was always intended to be a public good rather than a for-profit business. In interview after interview, rural mail carriers stressed that they put the service in the U.S. Postal Service. As a folklorist, Emily will connect postal history to the stories, songs, and traditions of Appalachian communities who live that history every day. Now, after the presentations, I will get us started with some questions, and you will hear answers from our panelists, and then we will open up the questions and answers for those of you here in the audience. And with that, I'd like to please welcome NRLCA President Don Maston.
Good evening, friends and fellow supporters of the Postal Service. Here with us in person, and to all rural carriers across the country that are tuning in for this special NRLCA event. It's an incredible honor to welcome you here tonight to this historic town of Shepherdstown in the heart of Jefferson County, West Virginia, the birthplace of rural free delivery, and a fitting home for our celebration of the 250th anniversary of the United States Postal Service. 250 years ago, when Benjamin Franklin became the first Postmaster General, the Postal Service was founded not just as a means of delivering correspondence, but as a lifeline in the beginning days as we formed our democracy. It was designed to connect citizens across distances, provide equal access to information, and unite our growing country. That mission has never been more vital and has never been more under threat than it is today. We gather here in West Virginia for a very specific reason. In 1896, just a few miles from where we stand, the very first rural free delivery route was launched in Charlestown. It was a simple but revolutionary idea that people in rural America should receive mail at their homes, just like people in cities. That every address mattered, that every person mattered. That principle, universal service, remains the heart of the Postal Service. It binds the country together and is what rural letter carriers, generation after generation, have brought to life through their daily work, driving miles of country roads, delivering not just mail, but medicine, ballots, news, and connection to our rural communities. Tonight, as we look back at our past, we must also contend with our present. I cannot remember a time when our union has faced so many potentially profound threats, from attempts to privatize our institution, to the sudden resignation of Postmaster General, to proposals in Congress that would gut retirement benefits and undermine public service, all in the name of profit. These challenges strike at the very idea of a public postal service, and they disproportionately threaten the communities we serve, rural, remote, often forgotten. But we are not powerless, and we are not alone. That's why tonight matters. When we began planning this event, we knew we needed to do more than just hold a ceremony. We needed to tell a deeper story. That story lives not just in legislation and labor contracts, but in the culture and communities that grew alongside our mail routes. That's why we brought together some remarkable voices here tonight to help us reflect on this legacy. As Michael indicated, you'll hear from Alison Bazylinski of the Smithsonian National Postal Museum, who will show how rural free delivery didn't just bring mail, it transformed the lives of rural Americans. You'll hear from Dr. Sarah Johnson, whose work in public history helps us understand how everyday tools and uniforms reflect bigger cultural shifts. You'll also hear from folklorist Emily Hilliard, who will connect our postal history to the stories, songs, traditions of Appalachian communities who live that history every day. On behalf of the 130,000 rural carriers who are delivering mail every single day to the 51.3 million rural households across this country, often on back roads and in all kinds of weather, I want to extend a heartfelt thank you to the Jefferson County Museum and especially the Shepherd University Appalachian Studies Program and its director, Professor Ben Bankhurst, for their partnership and sponsorship of tonight's event. Their commitment to preserving and lifting up the story is deeply appreciated. To each of our speakers, thank you for bringing your time, talent, and knowledge to this program. Your voices help ensure that this story, that this history lives on. We didn't bring these speakers here just to share facts. We invited them because the history of the Postal Service is not just institutional, it is personal, it is cultural, and it is rooted in the experiences of the people who built and sustained it, rural letter carriers, their families, and the communities that they serve. Our commitment to preserving that legacy is not just academic, it's political, it's economic, and my friends, I assure you, it is urgent. Right now, powerful interests want to turn this 250-year-old public treasure into a private profit machine. They want to sell off assets, cut services to unprofitable areas, and leave rural America behind. But we're here to say, not on our watch. The 250th anniversary is a call to action. So tonight, as we listen, learn, and celebrate, let us also recommit ourselves to this simple truth: the Postal Service belongs to the people. Rural letter carriers, past, present, and future, are at the very center of that promise. Tomorrow, we have another event at the Byrd Center to hear directly from rural letter carriers. You'll hear more about that from Michael, but we encourage you to attend or tune in to that live stream as well. Thank you for being here. Thank you for tuning in. And thank you for all that you do. And let's keep delivering for another 250 years. Thank you. At this time, I'd like to invite Alison to the stage.
Thank you, Dawn, and thank you, Michael, for that introduction. I'm thrilled to be here. Big thank you to the NRLCA. As they mentioned, I'm one of the curators at the National Postal Museum, and this is an area of interest for me. I, like Sarah, actually grew up in Iowa, so that was most of my childhood into my adult years. Actually in grad school as well, we had a great rural post office and a rural delivery route. And that was my favorite post office to visit because they were just always so welcoming and so nice. So I thought I would start off my presentation with this image of this stamp that commemorated the 100th anniversary of rural free delivery. So bringing together the stamp and the history sides of my position in our museum. This is a 32-cent stamp released on August 7th, 1996, Charleston, West Virginia, and it was in conjunction with the National Rural Letter Carriers Association 92nd National Convention. I love the image on this stamp. I like that it was commemorated in this way, and that's something that is held at our National Museum because rural delivery has been so important to the history of America. It fundamentally changed the lives of countless Americans in the early 20th century, which is what I'm going to talk about, but also since then. It connected people in isolated locations to broader communities and information across the nation through letters, through newspapers, through magazines, and through mail order, through parcel post, as we get further on. So I'm going to start with a timeline. Like any historian, I love a timeline because to get an idea of where rural free delivery fit in, we have to go back to the past. So 1775, we get the official begin of the American Postal Service. And before that, we did have a postal service. It was the British Postal Service. And the American system adopted many of the aspects of the British postal system, but it made some really key changes as well, among them being privacy in the mail. So our next big step is 1847. The Postal Department, again, actually following the British, introduces postage stamps. And prior to stamps, mail was paid for on receipt, and the cost was dependent on the number of pages you were sending and the distance the mail traveled. So with stamps, mail becomes a lot cheaper and more accessible, and patrons just paid a flat fee up front, simplifying the system for postal employees and for people sending mail. So the next step, 1863, we get free home delivery is first introduced. And prior to this, and this does continue in rural areas, people had to go to the post office to pick up their mail, or in some cities, people would pay an extra fee to have their letters delivered to their house. So the idea with free home delivery in cities was that everything went to your door, you didn't have people crowding the post office, and you're not paying these extra unnecessary fees. So by 1887, a city previously was over 50,000 people. By 1887, it just needs to be a town of 10,000 people, and they become eligible for free home delivery. So by 1890, over 450 cities had free home delivery. However, that might sound like a lot. There were approximately 76 million people in the United States, and half of those people lived in rural areas. And at this time, rural free delivery was only available to, or sorry, not rural free delivery, free city delivery was available to about 19 million. So all in all, about a quarter of the population of the United States in 1890 got free home delivery. And this obviously left out millions of people in rural areas. And it's actually Postmaster General John Wanamaker, the same Wanamaker of the department store, became a big supporter of instituting rural free delivery. I'm sure he saw some commercial potential with that, but there was also a lot of public sentiment, particularly through agrarian movements and populist reforms in organizations like the Grange and the Farmers Alliance that had all been agitating for more equity in mail delivery, particularly for people in rural areas. So this was a key initiative that cut across different organizations and different lines, and John Wanamaker was a big proponent. And actually this quote, countless benefits for rural dwellers, that is something that he said, and that is what he believed about rural free delivery. So to give you an idea of what rural versus urban mail might look like, you would, a general post office in a rural area would probably double as another building as well, a store or some sort of shop front, because postmasters who lived in rural areas didn't make enough for that to be their only business. In contrast, you have these are just postal clerks sorting mail in an urban post office. So that really is this massive contrast. But what isn't seen in these is that for many, many people in rural areas, they didn't live close to the post office. So to get there, to get your mail, to get what you might need to make a living, all of those things, that might be a really difficult trip, and you needed to have transportation, you needed to have time, which you might not have. So there really is this big disconnect between rural and urban. And we talk about 1896 when the experiment began, and it actually might have started sooner. Congress did appropriate funds first in 1893 and then in 1895 to get rural free delivery started, thanks in part to the advocacy of these groups that I mentioned before. However, by then, Wanamaker was no longer Postmaster General, and the new Postmaster General, William Bissell, refused to use the funds. And this occurred in 93 and 95. Fortunately, he soon resigned, and the two postmasters who succeeded him, William L. Wilson and James A. Gary, supported using these funds. So it is in 1896, with $40,000 appropriated by Congress, that service starts in West Virginia. And it was very popular very quickly. In his 1897 annual report, Postmaster General James Gary described the enthusiasm of farmers and talked about how they could now receive their newspapers, their periodicals, their letters, and they don't have to take that time to go to town. And that just makes a big difference. So within 1 year, rural service is established in over 44 routes in 29 different states, and the post office department was flooded with petitions from farmers requesting service in their area, because in order to get a rural route, you had to write to your congressperson, you had to get 100 families to sign the petition, and then they had to put it forward, and generally speaking, they almost always put it forward. So service spreads sort of unevenly across the country. So for example, areas in the Midwest tended to have service before areas in the Southeast, but it was spreading and it was very popular. And so by 1902, rural free delivery becomes a permanent part of the U.S. Post Office Department. And I included this newspaper article because I wanted to highlight that it wasn't just men who served as rural carriers. Like in rural post offices, women could and did apply for these jobs and worked these jobs. So Miss Helen Kramer, you can't read it because it's very small, but she actually measured her own route. She had a wheel and a measuring tape, so she tracked her route. She applied to become a carrier, and she even created her own uniform. She made a pattern, she bought the cloth, and she's written up in several newspapers in this time period. So all these tasks are really even beyond her job description, but she was emphatic about doing these things. So getting into the collections of the National Postal Museum, we have many different types of objects related to rural free delivery. Many of them are ones used by letter carriers, but this first one, the letter on the left, has a rural free delivery cancellation mark. So it is sent from Kansas to Nebraska. And we don't have a ton of these in there, but we know obviously that it was an RFD route. And as I mentioned, the Midwest had more of these. And then the introduction of RFD also opened up new possibilities in terms of mail order. So this advertisement for Montgomery Ward actually appeared in RFD News, the monthly and then weekly publication. That was the official publication of the NRLCA. And large businesses regularly ran advertisements in RFD News because letter carriers and their families were not just employees of the post office department, they were people who lived on these routes as well. They were often really big advocates for these routes. So they were bringing these things to people in terms of catalogs, in terms of goods, but they were also purchasing them themselves. So companies really saw this as a new market and began to think about how they might make products appealing to this new market and this new audience, or tweaking things to make them more useful to letter carriers or to people in their community. We have this travel commission for a rural delivery special agent, and postal inspectors were actually really critical to RFD's success. The department assigned inspectors temporary duty as special agents, which made them responsible for determining the practicality and even design of RFD routes. So as I mentioned, you had to apply for a route, you had to have signatures. So the inspectors would come, they would look at the route, they would make sure that carriers didn't end up using the same road twice, and that each route had to meet at least 100 families, and then the roads had to be passable, which is something I'll come back to in a moment. So after they would review the proposed route, agents sent their notes back and their notes and their route maps back to department headquarters in Washington, D.C., and that was ultimately where the decisions were made. But these agents would go back in the field and be in contact with the community as well as the post office department. So they would check the routes twice a year to make sure that carriers, mailboxes, roads met specifications, that letter carriers could get through, and that things were in working order. So this pass for Mr. De la Montaña allowed him to travel for free on trains, boats, and coaches in performance of his postal duties. And he traveled through several Western states between 1900 and 1910 to investigate petitions for the establishment of rural free delivery routes. And as you can see, it says this was good for 1 year, so it was from 1901 to 1902. So I mentioned roads, and this is an example of why roads were a concern. Poor roads were one of the biggest obstacles to establishing rural routes. And post office basic policy starting in about 1899 was that rural routes would not be laid where roads were unfit for service. However, this was not quite a hard and fast policy. And interestingly, the improvement of rural roads throughout the country becomes really tied up with rural free delivery. In RFD News, there's a lot of articles that are asking patrons to report on road conditions, and letter carriers would keep track of this as well. And then there are advertisements offering contracts for fixing roads or help with poor roads. And even though the post office stated that they would refuse routes, they did actually push to keep roads open, and then getting reports from agents and from letter carriers were all part of this process. So there were definitely issues, but at the same time, there's a movement that is happening to make things better and to keep the service going. So early rural letter carriers made their rounds in whatever way they could. And again, roads with these types of carriages would be very difficult if it was rainy or muddy or if there are any of those issues. So we have this rural free delivery wagon from 1899 in our collection. And I included this advertisement for the wind splitter from RFD News, so you can see where rural carriers might be purchasing things from and how they might find out about what types of vehicles they could get. Unlike city carriers, rural carriers were responsible for purchasing their own vehicles. And for those who used horses, they're responsible for purchasing, feeding, and stabling the animals. So it was no small feat to become a rural delivery driver and to keep that up. In the winter, you might have a mail sled. And I chose these photos so you can see some of the conditions they were working in. During winter months, if you could afford to get a second vehicle, or if you live someplace that had a lot of snow, this might be a good bet. And there are later Model Ts that they're a little bit past this time period, but they also have the tracks for snow as well. So this rural delivery sled, it was probably built by local craftsmen in New Hampshire, and it was put into use in 1900 while the service was still in its experimental phase. So if you're in cold weather and you're getting a sled, you also need to keep warm. And here we have a foot warmer that was used by rural letter carrier Arthur J. Benson, and he delivered mail in his enclosed wagon. So he purchased this heater a short time after he started as a rural carrier on October 29th, 1917. Jumping out of my time period, but it's such a good photo. And he worked as a letter carrier for 48 years. And then he donated this object to the museum. And you can see that there is also an advertisement for a very similar heater in RFD News. So RFD News, again, bringing together things that a letter carrier might need, and then also things that their family might need as well. Although rural carriers have never been required to wear uniforms, this did not stop companies from advertising them, which is fascinating. Did not need to buy them. So I kept finding in RFD News advertisements from different firms advertising official RFD uniforms. The marketing techniques included articulating the sophistication of the uniform and how you would look and the importance of handling the nation's mail. And they would put in words like regulation and official into their ads. And we unfortunately don't have any examples of these older uniforms. We do have several cap badges, which again, not required. But many of these RFD badges, people might want them so if you don't know anyone near you, they know who you are, they know what you're doing. And they had this strap like on this one so you could keep it onto your hat and it wouldn't fall off. Oh, sorry, I forgot about this. I'm going to the advertisement on the far right. These are spring belts delivery robes, and we do have these in the collection. So on the far left, we have this automobile and driver's robe, and it does have spring-loaded sort of contraption around your waist so it could keep you warm and keep you dry. It's in not amazing condition right now. but at the time, it probably would have been very helpful. So these were used by Forrest W. Crookham, who started his early career as a rural free delivery driver out of Roseville, Illinois. And he began working in 1915 and was still working a route when he donated this item of clothing to the Smithsonian in 1960. So he described wearing the driver's robe during the horse and buggy days, saying, quote, "It has a spring loop that fits snugly around your waist, and as you would rise up or lean over to reach a mailbox, the robe followed you and always stayed in place. As for your feet, there were 2 pockets, shoe-shaped, at the bottom of the robe, and if necessary, it was possible to walk to some extent with it on. It was a godsend to me, as before wearing it, I froze or frosted my feet every winter." So we have that amazing piece, and then we have these bearskin gloves and a raccoon fur coat, and these were owned and used by Addison Parker, who is a rural free delivery carrier from Nebraska, and he may even have purchased these items through the mail, because while he was in Nebraska and the gloves were purchased out of a company in Omaha, the coat was made by an outerwear manufacturer from St. Paul, Minnesota. So either he traveled or he might have ordered it. We're not sure. We don't unfortunately have that information, but it is far enough that I can make some guesses. So Parker worked out of Fullerton in Central City, Nebraska, and today those are about 2 hours away from Omaha. So even that, getting to Omaha to pick up those gloves, that would have been a real trek. And he needed warm clothing because he delivered mail by horse and buggy, and he worked from the late 1800s into the early 1900s. These are some of my personal favorite pieces that we have. So in addition to bringing mail and to bringing newspapers, RFD carriers also really brought the post office to their customers. They brought cancellation stamps with them, so they could mark letters. They would carry stamps with them, and this advertisement is showing a traveling supply cabinet. So it's saying, and the ad reads, "If you knew what a convenience these cabinets are for the rural carrier, you would mighty soon have one." And this would have maybe been something that they could use to carry all their supplies, and that way their customers and their community didn't have to make that trek themselves. On the left, we have this RFD cancellation device. So what would have marked the letter I showed you earlier. And it is a rubber stamp die affixed to a flat lid of a pocket-sized case. So when the case was opened, the rubber stamp was already inked and ready to use. So you're not messing around with an ink pad. Another thing that rural citizens had to think about was getting a mailbox. They initially had to supply their own mailboxes, and at first there were no real standard sizes or shapes. So we have this wooden mailbox from Delaware from the late 19th or early 20th century, and then you start seeing more high-tech models. So this postal box signal was designed specifically for use by rural free delivery customers, and some designs had flags of different colors, so like one to show the carrier when mail was ready to be picked up, and one to show the patron that a delivery had arrived. And this was meant to save time for carriers who had long rural routes, and then patrons walking to a potentially empty mailbox if it wasn't by their house, which it might not be. And then to secure these boxes, we have a series of RFD locks in the collection. And so if your mailbox was not necessarily in sight of your house, there might be a cluster at the end of the road, it might be a little bit of a walk, you would use a lock such as this to secure your mailbox. And finally, I wanted to end on another one of my favorite objects. I keep saying favorite objects, but this is for shipping bees. So shipping of agricultural products really blossomed as a result of the introduction of rural free delivery, and then the 1913 start of the parcel post service. So this rectangular wooden container is for shipping queen honeybees, and there are 3 partial cancels on the other side. So 2 holes at the end were sealed during transit, one with mesh wire and the other with a sugar candy plug. And then when the cage is introduced to the hive, the bees would work their way through the candy plug and the queen is released. So I will end on that and just say again that I in my own research, And working as a curator and as a historian, it is really evident how much rural delivery has meant to the people of this country and how much it changed this country in the early 20th century. And that just wouldn't have been possible without this history. So thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Alison. That was amazing. I've actually been sitting on this image in the left for some time. It has a rural carrier having screwed the top of the Capitol dome off, and the caption is "Keeping an Eye on Congress." So it's funny how much things have changed and how little things have changed. Anyway, I too am thrilled to be here. The rural free carriers really deliver change to American culture, and that's what I'm going to talk to you about tonight. And this is personal for me. I grew up on a family farm in Iowa. 3 generations at RFD 3, just southeast of New Hampton. So we were consumers of mail order from 1920 to 2006 when my parents moved into town. And that really sparked my interest in mail order history that I would go on to explore at an academic level and write my dissertation about that, my doctoral thesis. I just thought I'd throw in some of my own personal ephemera. The letter on the top is addressed to me, though my name is spelled incorrectly, and it's from the Conservation District, where I won 3rd in a speech contest when I was in the 7th grade. Thank you very much. So anyway, the land, I think, had a deep impression on me. And then I went on to talk about academically and teach about department store history. And John Wanamaker was an enormously successful department store owner in Philadelphia. And he had a much more global vision. And as a result of that vision, any number of his naysayers in the newspapers at the time, Harper's Weekly and the New York World and the American Economist, were very critical of Benjamin Harrison for considering him to be the Postmaster General because he had been using advertising in his business. But I would posit that, in fact, it was that global vision that he had because he was doing international business with his firm that brought the US Postal Service kind of into a new and sort of more modern and global age because of this whole idea of extending the mails, first through the Universal Postal Union in 1874, and then when he really hatches this idea of, again, with the advocacy groups for agriculture, taking the mail to the rural population in this country. So he's Postmaster General from 1889 to 93. And again, I think he was certainly a very savvy businessman, but it was that vision that I think gets us to think more seriously about investing the money, which was an enormous amount, to reach coast to coast and get rural free delivery to all Americans. Former National Postal Museum Director James Bruns wrote a little pamphlet called Reaching Rural America, and he discusses how Wanamaker really got support from those grassroots advocacy groups in the 1870s. And he was certainly expanding his own company's use of the mail in that sensibility and in the, let's see. Oh, shoot, oh no, I've killed it. Well, anyway, in the ad, ladies can shop by penny postal card. And as a result of that, we get again, we get a lot more mail in circulation as more and more people begin to get national newspapers and magazines and the advertising that they contained. And then on the right, again, after the UPU gets passed in 1870, the 1870s, let's just say, they begin to, again, negotiate deals with countries all over the world. And there's a little ad for the Leeward Islands there where he negotiates a contract. So the irony is that you can actually send and receive a package from a foreign country that's bigger than 4 pounds, but you can't receive one nationally. Until parcel post gets passed, and that will add a lot more to your routes as well. There's so much that has been written about postal history, some of it by carriers or children of carriers, and some by, in fact, people who worked within the post office department itself. In this, the Rural Free Delivery book that was written by Perry Heath and published in 1899 cites the various routes. But the point is that daily mail delivery significantly increases newspapers, and the local newspapers and the business that they do, the subscriptions that they can sell as a result of that, increases exponentially in this period of time, as do the national magazines. And then, of course, the advertising that was within those increases the mail even more. And this is, on the right is, again, the list of the early routes from the Postmaster General's annual report. All right, on we go. And the amount of pride in the service, I think, is really obvious when you look at the visual representations that we see in this, as rural free delivery really begins to take root. This one is the RFD carriers in front of Bucyrus, Ohio. And there's so many postcards of post offices as a real point of municipal pride. And this one was not used. It had a divided back, so it was after 1907. And then these are carrier cards. Carrying the mail, still carrying the mail on route number 4, which is a little joke there. But in that case, there's a whole industry that springs up as a result of this, the RFD printing house in Logan, Ohio. And again, it tells you that you can get a dozen of these cards for 10 cents, 25 for 15 cents, or 50 for 25 cents to give to your patrons, for the holidays or thereabouts. And the nearer slide that signed Arthur is again a different variation on the same theme. That one has an undivided back, so before 1907, and is addressed to J.O. Seeley, RFD 4, Middlebury, Washington, with a 1-cent Benjamin Franklin stamp. And this one, this real photo postcard, Kodak actually sold postcard cameras that would, the picture then could print out onto a postcard size negative and be mailed. This one actually was not mailed. It was carried outside of the mail by the carrier and signed, let's see, Season's Greetings, written by Arthur Durr in McGregor, Iowa. And again, he's actually handing the mail off to somebody, to a nice consumer there on the right. Although the real photo postcard has been nearly destroyed in this case. So the extent to which newspapers in towns of all sizes increase their subscription rates is fairly significant. And this article from the New York Times in 1905 reflects that. 50 new daily papers, rural free delivery, responsible for the demand in Iowa. A fair amount of this talk has been drawn from some research that I did that was funded by the State Historical Society of Iowa, looking at opposition to rural free delivery and parcel post. And that article will be forthcoming soon. There was a guy called Colonel Emery who wrote for an advertising publication a column called Embracing the Farmer's Wife. I don't know if this is what he had in mind. But these postcards, there was a number of these postcards, and any number of them have, you know, initials written in on the couple. So the point here is that, again, what rural free delivery does is it brings outside influences to what had been relatively isolated farm families that had existed more or less the same. And it advances culture significantly, and in ways that sometimes farm families became culturally uncomfortable with. So it's interesting to see, to me, how that works its way into American culture in ways that we will continue to chart. And then one of the things I've been working on mail order for most of my career, and I didn't really think it was still possible to surprise me. But I found examples of rural free delivery stationery, which again also I think reflects this whole idea of pride that you're on this new, very modern route. I have a couple of examples of the stationery on the left. Letters again from the first decade of the 20th century. And the example on the right is actually a new acquisition for me. And it's from Maine. So, and in a completely different graphic layout. But this, again, the same sensibility that you can fill in your route number and personalize it. This was also the golden age, or what's called by postcard collectors the golden age of American postcards. And postcards acted, again, delivered on a daily basis, to really kind of cement and solidify social relationships and communication among family members and friends, kind of like text messages do today. And again, if we look at the message on these postcards, this one from Peterson, Iowa, you know, a lot of times they go into people's health. This one, are you picking corn? We're not picking corn. You know, so they're not particularly deep messages. And quite often they'll say, why haven't you written? Write or come and visit. So again, it really suggests that, and you know, there's another postcard that I have like this that said that this woman had just finished with her dinner dishes and she was sitting down to deal with the postals. So she was making her friends happy. She did right. But I think that's the role that the mail plays. It really connects people to each other in ways that farm families had not been connected to each other before. Hold on, I'm like shooting through here. This is an example of the Montgomery Ward catalog from 1904-5, where a fairly famous American illustrator and artist called Isaac or Ike Morgan does the cover illustration. Again, pretty prominent farm family here illustrated. So Ward's, you know, it contracts him to do this cover instead of just having it done in-house, which I think, again, also speaks to how successful mail order becomes. And if you look in the background, Ike Morgan has pictured their rural free delivery mail carrier there and this family getting their mail, probably waiting for their mail on the porch. I'm not going to bore you with statistics, but I'm just going to give you a sense, since I cut out the Sears material, the Sears Roebuck. Sears sales increased. In 1895, they sold $750,000 worth of goods. In 1900, they sell $10 million worth of goods. Wait for it. In 1907, they sell $50 million worth of goods. That's a whole lot of packages. And you couldn't send correspondence within packages. You had to send postal cards, because if you sent writing in a package, it went at the first class rate. So all of the correspondence went through postals. At one point, when the opposition to this, driven largely by rural small town merchants, they say, well, or the mail order companies get together and say, all right, we will actually ship your goods in a plain brown wrapper. But it wouldn't have really worked, because the mailmen or women would have known who was getting, who was actively participating in mail order commerce because of the money orders and the postal cards that they would be getting. So there was really no fooling people. And then the post, again, in about 1903, the post offices were, some of the post offices were posting lists of the people on the rural routes that the local merchants said was an unfair advantage to mail order companies, because then they could send agents to copy that material. This is an example of that same kind of complicity, where Montgomery Ward is sending a letter to Zonas King in Blockton, Iowa, rural free delivery route number 1, congratulating him on his new role as the mail carrier, and just letting him know that that Montgomery Ward was a solid company. And what the mail order companies would do was they would offer trips and tours to Chicago. So the complicity between mail carriers and the mail order companies was a surprise to me. Anyway, let's just put it that way. And then when Parcel Post passes and takes effect January 1st, 1913, the rates of packages, again, exponentially increase again. And this is a postcard that was done by a publisher in Exeter, New Hampshire, called Frank Swallow. And he does all kinds of these really funny satirical postcards. This one with the 200-ton Parcel Post truck with oversized goods, and the 2 delivery agents there. And he would swap out the names of different towns. And there's also a card in the Kurt Teich collection in Illinois that has a postmaster and his assistant. And the caption is something like, "It's taken us so long to read through the postals, now we have to inspect everything that's come in the Parcel Post packages." So there really were no secrets in small towns in terms of who was using the mail to get their goods. And that creates some cultural tension. This is actually an award-winning advertisement for a tailoring company that was done by Joseph Chenoweth, and won a national advertising award in 1921, and actually was exhibited in New York City for the winners that particular year. But again, the young farm woman is gazing kind of romantically at this very fancy urban man in his suit, while the young farm lad is leaning on the fence, gazing at her, but being ignored by the young woman. So the urban influences to rural culture, I think, have a profound effect. And she's spilling her milk too. And I would just like to say that the librarians at Hunt Library at Carnegie Mellon found this image for me years later, and 3 cheers to both postal workers and librarians, because they both rock. I am not a statistician, I will be honest with you. However, it's interesting to look at the statistics. I just did a quick survey of newspapers.com, and the spike down there, you see the incidence of the search term mail carrier, because RFD carrier didn't actually hit me much pay dirt there. There's 3.8 million entries in the newspapers that have been digitized. And it was largely the same in terms of Google has another statistical tool called the Ngram. And it follows the same sort of pattern of incidences of the term being used in all of the material that's been digitized in Google Books. So again, giant spikes exactly where you would expect them in the early 1860s when the cities get delivery, and then particularly when rural free delivery comes into play. This is a real photo postcard of a play that was put on in St. Paul, Minnesota in the 19-teens at some point. I think what's important about rural free delivery is that it winds up diffusing its way through American culture and turns up in, again, a lot of the cultural forms that we see. So we have drama here. And when I did that survey through newspapers.com, the amount of very dramatic headlines, I just want to share a few of them with you. One of them is "Saw Lady with Mrs. Keys. Mail carrier testifies against nurse on trial for murder," 1917. "Diamond in chicken's crop. Wife of former mail carrier finds it. Says shot pierced plane. Dr. Christmas tells of attack on flying mail carrier," 1912. "Poison after April joke," 1912. "Unable to work, he dies. Old letter carrier leaves note," 1911. So the drama in real life, in people's lives, winds up working its way into lots of forms of American culture. And particularly, I think we see that in this example, Sam, the Parcel Postman, which is a sheet music, again, when lots of families had a piano and would stand around and sing. And then in this A Rural Free Delivery Romance, the silent movie from 1914, I have not found anything besides stills of that, but if anybody finds a copy of that, let me know. And then this real photo postcard that says, "Here's a postal of our dear mail carrier. I think you will like to have it to look at. I will write soon. With best wishes, Harriet." I know, that's so great, isn't it? I love that. Just got that one. It just arrived in the mail on Monday. And I'd like to end with what I think of as the magic of the mail, because some friend's son, Tom, in about 1999, Tom was 5, and he would play mailman, and he would borrow one of Mary's bags, one of her tote bags, and put on a little cap and take their junk mail and sort of deliver it to family members. And I think that the magic of that, the magic of putting a letter in a box and it arriving at its destination, sometimes hundreds or thousands of miles away, is really fairly extraordinary. And this, I'd just like to leave you with this image, which is an 1893, again, sort of novelty postcard, where if you pull the tab up of the mailbox, there was a little circular for fittings. I think it was actually plumbing fittings. Thank you very much, and thank you for your service. And here's some literature. It's a little spicy, but RFD number 3 by Homer Croy. So if you want to have a look at some American literature from this period of time that reflects this, have at it. Thank you very much.
Hello, thank you all for being here tonight, and to the NRLCA and the Shepherd University Appalachian Studies Department for hosting this. It's a real honor to be here. Like Don said, my name is Emily Hilliard, and I'm a folklorist at Berea College in Berea, Kentucky. And in 2021, I received an Archie Green Fellowship from the American Folklife Center at the Library of Congress to conduct an occupational folklife documentation project with rural postal workers in the Appalachian regions of Kentucky, North Carolina, Ohio, Virginia, and West Virginia. And these interviews, photos, videos, and other materials became part of the American Folklife Center's Occupational Folklife Project, which documents the experiences and culture of American workers. And as we know and learned about more in Alison and Sarah's presentations, Central Appalachia, and more specifically right here in Jefferson County, was the birthplace of rural free delivery, beginning in 1896. Prior to that, those who lived in rural areas, which was over half of the country's population at the time, had to travel to the post office to send or receive mail. And RFD was that effort by the Postal Service to ensure direct delivery to every household in the US. So my initial inspiration for the project that I did came 77 years later from a 1973 Sesame Street segment called Mailman in Appalachia. Has anyone seen this, or do you remember it? Maybe, yeah, maybe a few. So I would like to play that for you now. It's pretty short.
I'm the mailman. I deliver mails by horseback. Deep in the Appalachian Mountains of Kentucky. The roads is rough. You can't get through it without walking or going horseback. And it's too far to walk, and I ride a horse. People wait for me. They know the days I'm coming, and they all glad to see me coming. Get their mail. Pine Top Post Office is too far away for them to walk and get it. I carry mail Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. Winter, spring, summer, and fall. Sometimes I give children short rides on the road as I go along. Then I have to go on. It's a long mail route, 18 miles through these mountains. I have a long way to go.
So I later learned that the featured mailman is Irvin Pratt, a blacksmith and one of the last mail carriers in Appalachia to deliver by horseback on what we saw was a rugged and mountainous daily 18-mile route from Pine Top to Hollybush in Knott County, Kentucky. That's about 120 miles from where I now live. So the clip shows how Pratt was an important lifeline for his community members who may have lacked transportation to make the trip to the Pine Top post office themselves, relied on mail delivery of goods and supplies to their mountain homes, and may have been awaiting news from their loved ones serving in Vietnam. There is now a monument to Pratt in the Knott County seat. So I wanted to understand more about the daily work of a rural mail carrier and the role they play in their communities today in the region where I live. So while mail carriers are no longer delivering by horseback in Appalachia, though apparently there are still some routes in the Grand Canyon that are still using animal power. Okay, confirmed by the Smithsonian historian. So 50 years later, rural mail delivery to communities in the region and across the country is just as important, if not more so. So here are some realities of rural mail in the US today. So there's 50 million rural mailboxes. That's about 30% of Postal Service delivery points. 129,000 rural mail carriers, serving about 83,000 rural routes. 57% of post offices are in rural areas, and 88% of the land served by the Postal Service is rural. And here are some demographic considerations in rural America today that make rural mail service invaluable. So compared with urban areas, as you can see, the population in rural areas is older. It has more needs in terms of disability, poverty, and access, making rural mail delivery crucial for the rural population to pay bills, receive life-dependent prescription medications, communicate with loved ones, and for the last mile delivery of shipments that FedEx, UPS, and Amazon are not willing to offer. Rural mail also offers secure, well-paying union jobs in rural areas. And yes, 22% of rural areas lack sufficient broadband coverage, making the mail even more important. So some realities of the rural letter carrier profession: they operate a post office on wheels. So they sell stamps, accept and deliver mailable matter, offer change of address and other USPS forms, and sell money orders. So in this way, they are effectively roving hubs of federal services in rural areas. They are also paid on an evaluated system where each route has a compensation amount attached to it, whereas city carriers are paid hourly and get overtime. Many rural letter carriers drive their own vehicles and are given an equipment maintenance allowance for that. And rural carriers still do not wear a USPS uniform, but rather their own clothes. And what carriers prefer to wear on the route for different weather is one topic that came up in our interviews. Clothing choice, like Alison spoke about, is important because they spend so much of their route with the window open, but also need to be able to move and be appropriately dressed when they get out to deliver packages. So there's a map of where my interviews took place. So as far west as Park City, Kentucky, almost to Bowling Green, and that carrier's route goes through part of Mammoth Cave National Park. As far north as Lancaster, Ohio, almost to Columbus. As far east as Elkins, West Virginia. I didn't quite make it out this far. And as far south as Warrensville, North Carolina. Most of my interviewees were in Kentucky, 12 of them. There were 5 in West Virginia, 4 in Ohio, 3 in Virginia, and 1 in North Carolina. And I interviewed 11 women and 14 men, though the NRLCA reports that 57% of rural mail carriers are female. And here's a selection of a few of my interviewees. So there's Stephanie Endicott from Louisa, Kentucky. She drove an 80-mile route, and she's a recently retired 30-year rural mail carrier and the former Kentucky Rural Letter Carriers Association president. Jeremy Precer from French Creek, West Virginia. He drives a 70-mile route with 600 boxes, and he's a 6-year rural letter carrier. Nancy Roten in Warrensville, North Carolina, who drove an 80-mile route with 500 boxes, and she served for 20 years and is retired. And Brian Grimm from Fries, Virginia, who drives a 65-mile route with 680 boxes, and he's a 28-year rural letter carrier. He's also an old-time fiddler and a sheep shearer. And I found that a lot of the rural mail carriers that I talked to, or several of them, were also musicians, or they might farm, the family farm. And the length of routes and number of boxes of my interviewees ranged from about 19 miles and 850 boxes, so very dense, to spread out, so 115 miles and 350 boxes. And it was particularly exciting for me to interview NEA National Heritage Fellow and famed luthier and musician Wayne Henderson. So though he has made guitars for the likes of Eric Clapton, Gillian Welch, and Doc Watson, what not everyone knows about Wayne is that he carried the mail in his home community of Rugby, Virginia for 32 years, beginning in 1969. And Wayne said that when he was growing up, the local carrier held an esteemed position in the community and was a resource who could assist with writing official letters and navigating other business. And that esteemed community position was one reason that Wayne took the job and kept it for so long while growing his guitar making business, which is not something he really needed to do because his guitars sell for tens of thousands of dollars. And Henderson's first postmaster had been a rural carrier on horseback, and Wayne remembers delivering 2 mailboxes that were at horse height and often had a lot of spiders in them. But he's actually standing in front of the old mail case that he would sort, and now he uses that to sort or keep track of his guitar orders. While the topics of the 25 interviews were wide-ranging, these are some of the prominent themes that emerged, as well as carriers' experiences delivering the mail during the height of COVID-19. Since I was doing the project in 2021 and 2022, that was really a prominent theme that came up. And so I want to focus in particular on the topic in the center, the role that rural letter carriers play as care workers in service to rural communities, as it connects to many of those other topics that rural carriers shared. So when I asked carriers about what they liked the most about their job, their top answer was number 1, their customers, and 2, being out on their own in a beautiful place. Byesville, Ohio carrier Joy Lucas sent me these photos she had taken along her route in fall and winter. And carriers also talk about the animals they see and sometimes interact with, for better or for worse, along their route, from wild mink, fox, bobcats, bald eagles, and bears to domesticated animals and livestock. But it's not just an appreciation of the beauty of the rural landscape. Because rural mail carriers are driving the same roads day in and day out, that means that they know these rural areas intimately. And they may be the first person to know when a creek has flooded and the road is impassable, or a farmer's cows got out, and they might help to bring them back in, or a house is on fire. And like I said, their relationship with their customers is the number 1 thing that rural letter carriers liked about their jobs, and what retired carriers say that they miss the most. Many talked about seeing kids along their route grow up, how they took care of their customers and their customers took care of them, the gifts they received from customers showing their appreciation. And here's a list of some of the things that my interviewees mentioned: cookies, candies, fresh pork tenderloin or hamburger from customers who were meat farmers, a lap quilt and a miniature butter churn that was from an Amish customer. There's the lap quilt. Antifreeze for the mail carrier's car, gloves, canned goods, which included relishes, green beans, vegetable soup, homemade bread, knitted scarves, cupcakes, washed apples, fresh farmed eggs, cold bottled water on a hot day, or hot chocolate on a cold day. For some of their customers, particularly elderly folks who lived alone, their letter carrier was the only person they saw and talked to each day. And what all this amounts to, and what I think is the most important takeaway from my project, was how rural letter carriers serve as care workers in their communities. That is where many find the most satisfaction in the job, and which provides a crucial service for rural communities. This is a very human function and something that could not be performed by drone delivery or more automated services. So I'll give you a few examples. Carrier Karen Button, who was holding up the lap quilt, she had a letter to deliver, and it turned out to be from a dementia patient at a hospital in Louisville. And that was to an address on her route that was no longer in existence. But because Karen had been delivering the route for so long and grew up in the community, and her house is actually on her own route, she remembered that people who used to live at that non-existent address were related to another household on her route. So she delivered the letter to them. And they were the cousins of the patient who had written a letter to her now deceased parents. And she was describing that she was being treated so well at the hospital and couldn't wait to come home to see her mother and father soon. And this was incredibly meaningful to the patient's family to be able to get that letter. And that letter would have never arrived if Karen did not have such a long history and familiarity with that community along her route. Another example, so Lorna Atwater, a rural mail carrier from Berea, Kentucky, was driving her 75-mile route through the eastern Kentucky foothills when she noticed that the woods behind a customer's house were on fire. So she called the fire department and the homeowner, who she knew was the principal of the local high school, and wet down the backyard with their garden hose until the fire department could arrive. Other carriers reported bringing lost dogs back to their owners, saving the life of a customer who was choking, being the first on the scene of a traffic accident, or taking special care to ensure that veterans still receive their prescription medications in inclement weather. So formally, the Postal Service plays a critical role in the US government's National Response Framework, a network of government agencies that develops a comprehensive strategic response plan in the event of national disasters, bioterrorist attacks, pandemics, or other emergencies. But rural letter carriers are also key emergency responders in their communities on a more informal person-to-person basis every day. I heard several examples, like this quote from John Buckler, where carriers would help deliver goods to elderly or sick customers, even if it technically wasn't being sent through the mail. So John said, "I had a customer that I knew was having a treatment and couldn't get out, lived by herself. I didn't ask. I told the supervisor, I'm stopping and picking up her prescription on the way out of town, and I'm going to take it to her." So that was some of the importance of the work that we did, because we knew our customers, we had the personal touch with them and looked out for them, and they kind of looked out for us. So that's an example of how rural letter carriers go above and beyond to take care of their customers. And like we heard about the gifts, customers take care of them in turn. Rural delivery is also one of the crucial ways that rural people feel the positive impact of federal public services in a daily, tangible way. As Park City, Kentucky rural carrier Karen Button told me, we touch everybody every day in some way or another. And this does not go unnoticed by their customers. According to a 2022 report by the USPS, 81% of rural customers view the Postal Service as valuable. And rural people know the importance of this service, and they show their appreciation, like with those small gifts, or stopping to help fix a carrier's tire, or leaving that cold bottle of water in the mailbox on a hot day. So when I first started the interviews for my project on rural postal workers, I thought that these additional services that rural letter carriers provide, though beneficial, existed outside of the scope of their jobs. But what I really came to see was that the human elements of caregiving are in fact part of what makes their work essential to the remote communities they serve. And the Postal Service, too, knows this. It touts its mail carriers' intimate knowledge of their communities and personal relationships with customers as vital aspects of the agency's function and value. A 2020 white paper published by the Office of the Inspector General argues that the Postal Service, or that it is the Postal Service's roots in every community, unmatched address information, and carriers' extensive knowledge of neighborhoods from coast to coast that makes it an essential player in federal response efforts. And then mail carrier Kay Foltz put it this way: people out here by mail is how they still pay their bills. Everything important to them comes in the mail. I deliver a lot of medication, so it is important. It's not just for the mail. There's a lot more to it. It really is a service that if people didn't have, I think our country would be a lot different. Thank you.
To join me up on the stage for a few more minutes. We're going to do some Q&A and probably get you out of here around 8:45 tonight. Let me just say it's been my honor to be associated with this program, but there was a lot of work put into doing this, and I want to do a special shout out to Ian Gold, a special consultant to the NRLCA. And also wanted to recognize that the entire NRLCA National Board is here, except for one who's recovering from illness, but we are just pleased to have all of you here as well. And honestly, as a former American culture major in college, tonight is unbelievable, and I'm just so pleased that we've been able to do this. I think I want to just start with one question, and then I want to open it up to all of you. And it's something that you said, Emily, in your most recent remarks. There have been study after study, survey after survey by Pew and Gallup, and the Postal Service always comes up on top of those lists as the most trusted U.S. government agency. And through all of your work, for all of us here, do you have any insights that you can share about, why that is? And I'll let anyone start and maybe get a couple responses, and then we can begin with some audience questions. Anybody?
Okay, yeah, I think it's working. Yeah, I mean, I do think it is, like I said, that daily, tangible way that especially rural people feel a positive impact of the federal government. It might be they're paying the federal government and they might not see the impact of their taxes or other ways that the federal government might benefit their life, but they know when the mail comes. And so I think it is that daily interaction, but also that relationship with their mail carrier. It has a personal face, not just kind of like a bureaucracy that is abstract and they don't know how that functions. So yeah, I think it is that kind of outreach into communities and personal interaction that makes it something that Americans see as positive and valuable.
Yeah, I'll kind of add to that an aspect that a lot of people don't think about or don't realize is when we have disasters, be it 9/11 or whether it was COVID or anthrax, the different things that we've gone through, the normalcy that is brought back to the communities and when people feel that, everything is going to be okay, is when they see the rural mail carrier out there again, delivering the mail. There's that familiar face out there. There's a sense of, okay, everything's going to be fine because they see them day in and day out. And it brings that back to home. And sometimes when the world was a very unsettling place. So that piece of it also plays into why, I'll speak for rural letter carriers, why they're so beloved and well-liked by the customers. It's not only that, it's the other actions that they take and all the things that we've seen up here tonight.
Anybody else?
I think it's relationship building. It's the continuity that somebody comes to your house every day, over years, and sometimes multiple generations of families that carry on that tradition. So absolutely, I think it's about personal relationships. Absolutely.
Personal relationships, the building of community, everything that they said. I think I see it in the historical record and the objects we have at the museum, whether that's the 1960s, whether that's the 1910s. I see the same themes that Emily is seeing today, and those have held true for the past over 100 years.
Yeah. We do have some time for questions. I thought I saw a mic in the audience. Maybe it's still there, maybe it's not. But do we have any audience questions for our panelists? And if we do, if you can just stand up and wave your arm and I'll recognize you, and you're going to need to speak real loudly. Maybe we do have a mic. Thank you. And just maybe say who you are and ask away.
Thank you. Good evening. My name is Judy. I live in Shepherdstown, grew up in Shepherdstown. And I was wondering if you could tell me what you might know about our mail wagon, number 9, that is in our historic Shepherdstown Museum. You probably knew that question was coming.
Well, personally, I don't know much about your mail wagon, but I'm going to go and see it. I do know that the first rural route number 1 started in Charlestown. So, and I've seen the Postal Service has a wagon on display in their lobby. We have one of the little 1996 John Deeres in our office at the National Rural Letter Carriers, but specifically who drove that wagon, I'd be interested to hear any information who that was.
Okay, because I'm kind of personally connected to that wagon because that wagon was in a barn where my horses and ponies were for 20 some years, even before that. And I know that that barn was owned by Ben Hartzell. And I believe that Ben Hartzell, I was told growing up that he was a mail carrier, but I cannot find his name anywhere. And I know that Melvin T. Strider was one of the recognized mail carriers in the county. And so I'm thinking maybe Ben was like a substitute, because how that cart or that wagon ended up in his barn after all that is the mystery.
Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah.
I would help you research that if you shoot me an email.
Michael, touch on substitute carriers. My name is Bill Hyatt. I was a rural carrier, and I want to know something we can all do. We have an evil president now and an evil man named Musk that are trying to cut hundreds of thousands of jobs and do everything they can to, they say, cut cost. These are very evil people, and we need to be able to do something, you know, from this group and from any group that you belong to say, hey, not here. There is no such thing as a king. Thank you.
All right.
Well, I agree 100%, and I can let you know that all the efforts to privatize the Postal Service, the efforts of DOJ that have been at Postal headquarters, we're closely monitoring and watching. We've been holding rallies all throughout the nation. Rural carriers are becoming mobilized, they're becoming engaged, they're becoming activists, because we, the people, are the ones that can protect the Postal Service, stop the privatization, stop the kings from taking over the post office, and stop the DOJ and things that are coming. I'll tell you one thing, there are not excess rural carriers. In fact, we have a shortage of rural carriers. So to your point, we have to stand up together, and events like this bring awareness to the community, and we need to let our congressional representatives know when things such as the reconciliation language came through. Carriers, communities banded together across the nation and sent a loud and clear message to Congress through House Resolution 70. I believe we have 222 sponsors on that now, that the Postal Service is not for sale. So appreciate your support and keep fighting the fight.
Are there other questions?
I would also say, call your representatives and your senators and tell them that you are reliant on these services. And advocate, I think we have to advocate for ourselves in times like this.
So this is more of just some information that's out there. I am Pam Jones Wagner. I'm from Jefferson County in Charlestown. And my grandmother, Vesta Waters Jones, carried the very first female rural carrier in West Virginia on the very route that Melvin T. Strider carried. And when that was in 1919, she applied for the job. She didn't think she would get it because she was a female, but because so many of our men were in war, she did receive that job, and she carried the mail in a Model T along the very first route that Melvin T. Strider carried. When he was told that he would have to use an automobile and give up his horse, all this I have in some literature, he said, no way. And so she took over that route from him. And I'm so glad to have this program come. This has been rich history in our family. My grandmother has been written up in many books, and I am willing to share if anyone is interested. I have her original box that she carried on the front seat of her Model T that still has the RFD logo and emblem on it with her name. And the reason why she was able to keep that box when she retired is because she was the first woman in West Virginia. And I also have the letter that she wrote to the Postmaster General asking could they prove where she fell in rank in the United States. And they wrote back that that would take too much time and money, but that they thought that she was within the top 5. So I'm so glad to have this history of Jefferson County brought to life, and thank you.
Thank you for your story. Other questions?
Just a couple of little notes. Wild Bill McGinley from Pennsylvania. I remember we were going to a convention south of Tennessee. We stopped at Pigeon Ford, and we had rural carrier shirts on, and we stopped at the woodwork shop, and the guys were making wagon wheels and stuff. And the one guy came over and he thanked us so much that his parents still lived in Appalachia, and the mailman had to read the mail to them. And that was something he did extra. James Bruns and I, we were many years in touch. We built the 1896 wagon for rural free delivery for the 100th anniversary when we were down in Charlestown. And he helped us with that. And he also said, now the first one the Smithsonian put out there sign was a white one. And that was the original official white was the original colors. But wagons I found in barns over the years were red and blue, depending if you were a Republican or a Democrat. Crazy stuff. So.
Thank you. Any other questions? Let me ask one additional question to the panelists. We've been talking a lot about history, and we've been talking about the past, and it's been so incredibly educational, and we thank you all so much for being here. But if we can think about our history and think about what may be coming next, is the past a prelude to the future? What if you had your crystal balls, and as President Maston said, we want to have a postal service for another 250 years. What do you think's in store for rural Americans and the Postal Service?
The one question historians don't like to answer. What's coming in the future? I mean, based on the past and seeing the response to rural delivery and the place of rural delivery in our communities and that lifeline that's only gotten stronger over time. It was incredibly popular when it started, and I think we are now so much more connected in other ways, but that doesn't negate the importance of the mail. I don't think that will be going away, and so I don't believe that rural delivery is going away either. That isn't something that I would predict. How that will change, I don't know that, but I think that it is because of that, how things have evolved over the years, that we are now so connected in terms of its place in our communities.
Yeah. Any other thoughts? Don?
Yeah, I'd like to just add in that the future of the Postal Service, we have a new Postmaster General for days now. The jury is out to see how that goes. It came from FedEx and from Waste Management, and not necessarily he's saying the right words now. We'll see what the actions are down the road. The previous Postmaster General put together a plan, a 10-year plan to try to grow the business. The new Postmaster General has committed to that, but we're going to be watching very closely to make sure that happens. One thing, a thing happened in time, and I've said this before, that's kind of ironic. We had COVID. That was a very bad thing, but a couple of good things came out of COVID. We all learned how to do Zoom, and it's become a normal way to communicate now through Zoom. We also, e-commerce blossomed, and people started buying everything through the internet, and as a result, rural carriers specifically are delivering a lot of goods and parcels to their customers and saving them trips to town, and Amazon. And I know personally from looking at my Ring doorbell at home, my wife gets her pile of Amazon parcels every single day. So I know that this is one thing, depending where you are, positive that came out of something bad we went through. So I see the future of the Postal Service being a parcel dominant business, a competitor in the market, and we're growing our market share. And that's really the future of what lies before us. And some of the delivery networks and the modernization that has been put in motion, we want to watch and make sure that that continues.
Yeah, I think we also are at a time when federal infrastructure and, particularly that affects rural communities is under threat and being rescinded. And so what matters in moments like that, and also we've seen, sitting from a place in Appalachia, a lot of extreme weather events and a lot of flooding. And so I think rural mail will be even more important, because when there's a lack of a infrastructure, a social safety net, it's those person-to-person relationships, mutual aid. The fact that your rural mail carrier, that becomes more and more important. It's face-to-face relationships. So I see it becoming even more important in that way as well.
Whether it's it's sort of the invention of the telegraph or the telephone or the fax machine or the internet, these were all things that that folks thought would threaten the very survival of the Postal Service. And it seems to me that the Postal Service has come through all of those developments quite well. Sure.
Yes, I think that we have seen ugly capitalist forces in the past in this country. And some of the effects of those forces, the strikes, say, in the 1870s, get really, really grim. We grew beyond that. So it seems to me that people have to individually make choices and be intentional about your consumption. Mail more letters. Don was saying on the way over that he sends his 2 daughters postcards. It feels to me like if we want things to continue, we have to be active participants and agents of change. And I don't think we can sit silently by as things happen. So empower yourself.
I want to make sure that folks get a good night's sleep for tomorrow morning. And I want to bring this to a close and thank all of you for being here tonight at the Shepherdstown Opera House. And those of you who've joined us online, certainly want to thank our incredible presenters for their wisdom and generosity in being here tonight. So please, let's give them a very warm thank you. And I'd also say that if you enjoyed tonight's program and are interested in learning more about West Virginia's story and the Appalachian region, please consider supporting the Appalachian Studies program at Shepherd University. As I said, as a former American culture major myself, I know firsthand how much your support would mean to students and scholars, maybe even future labor lawyers. So please look for an email that might be coming to you about how you can be a supporter. We hope to see you again tomorrow morning at 9 at the Byrd Center here in Shepherdstown at Shepherd University. Tomorrow's program will also be live streamed and will feature Emily Hilliard again in conversation with President Maston and 2 rural carriers from West Virginia, Susan Rowan from Buchanan and Tim Thomason from Princeton. And we will hear firsthand about the critical role rural carriers play in the communities they serve. We'll also hear from Sarah Anderson, who directs the Global Economy Project at the Institute of Policy Studies, and Sarah will discuss the potential impact of privatization on rural communities. So again, thank you so much for being here tonight. Safe travels, and we hope to see you tomorrow.